Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video is going to discuss current events in the cryptocurrency world of scandal, fraud, deception, diversion, what else is new in our money system, right? And we're going to hone in on someone very specific, Sam Bankman-Fried, or Fried. It's hard to know how to pronounce the name. Sam Bankman is a Jewish fellow from Palo Alto. Stanford University campus is where he was born. It's where his parents were professors at Stanford University, legal attorneys. And Sam Bankman's father's name is Bankman. His mother's name is Fried, F-R-I-E-D. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. But he's taken the name of each of his father and his mother. That's how feminist and woke their family is. Anyway, Samuel Bankman-Fried is only 30 years old, okay? And he's going to be the scapegoat boogeyman for the FTX digital currency crypto exchange debacle, right? Anyway, that means the CIA crisis actor. That's what Sam Bankman-Fried is, and that's what his parents are. And that's what Stanford University is, and that's what Columbia University is, and that's what MIT is, which are all schools that he and his parents are affiliated with. Those are all spook schools. So because they went to spook schools and because they live in walking distance from KKR and Sequoia Capital, which are private equity money laundering facilities adjacent to the campus of Stanford University, located at 2800 Sand Hill Road. That's right, I said 2800 Sand Hill Road. That's where KKR's corporate headquarters is. That is where Sequoia is, in the exact same building as KKR. This is the premier venture capital money laundering facility for the entire world that we live in, whether it's RJR Nabisco, or whether it's Cisco Systems, whether it's Oracle, whether it's Sun Microsystems, whether it's Hewlett Packard, whether it's all manner of Silicon Valley. It all rolls through Sand Hill Road. And I did say that Erin Valente's last appointment where she was seen alive was on Sand Hill Road. And specifically, I said 2500 Sand Hill Road, which is about 100 yards away from where Sam Bankman-Fried's equity partner is located, Sequoia. Sequoia is in the same zip code as where Erin Valente, age 33, graduate of Jesuit Georgetown University, right? Young woman asking a few inappropriate questions about the meta universe, perhaps. A deal that was going down between Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Facebook, to create the meta universe back in October 2019. There's Erin Valente, right there where Sequoia Capital is, right there where KKR Partners is, right there on Sand Hill Road, right where Stanford University is, you know, where George Shultz recently passed away on their campus. George Shultz, Secretary of State, the head of the CIA Provisional Housing, he died on the Stanford campus. And Sam Bankman-Fried was born on the Stanford campus. Does everybody see a correlation here? Does correlation mean causation? Absolutely it does. 100%. It's a strong causation. Strong causation. I want to credit my friend and colleague Steve from back east. He is the founder of the MK Ultra Now channel on BitChute. You can only find Steve on BitChute, and I will put a link below to credit Steve. He's the one that asked me to look into this FTX crypto scandal that's in the news. He and I are going to be doing a discussion on this because it is an important topic of our money system, which is really, you know, part of centralized pacification and control of a civilized society, is some form of a money system. We can't all go around bartering and exchanging our labor for eggs and milk and basic necessities, which would be an alternative money system. You know, labor, if you could trade your labor for services or product, you know, that would work, and we wouldn't have to fool around with banks, and we wouldn't have to fool around with digital cryptocurrency either. But you can see where this is all going, right? It's centralized authority, centralized control, and the banks are totally in charge. Even though we talk about cryptocurrency as being an independent system, or we talk about gold bullion or silver coins, which are physical, that you can physically take possession of and try to hide in a secret place, the reality is the price of silver and gold is controlled by the banks. They control the price of gasoline, oil. They control all markets on the planet Earth. They've infiltrated every single market, and they have straw, fake investors, which are known as hedge fund shadow partners, who can bid up or down the value of cryptocurrency. They can crash cryptocurrency. They can crash the oil market. They can bid it up. They can bid it down, like that. And cryptocurrency is vulnerable to the same financial terrorism that the oil market is, that the gold market is, that the silver market is, that the titanium and aluminum markets are. All markets eventually are manipulated through the traditional banking system and their liaison partners like Sequoia Capital, which is an equity participant in the FTX exchange. Anyway, kudos to my friend Steve from the MK Ultra Now channel, link below. Let me begin our discussion by giving you a little bit of the background of the scapegoat du jour. Okay? So, Sam Bankman-Fried was born in 1992, specifically March 6, 1992, on the Stanford campus of Palo Alto. He was born and raised in an upper middle class Jewish family in California. You know, kind of like Dianne Feinstein was, right? Dianne Feinstein, not a real name. Goldman, not a real name either. Dianne Feinstein went to a Roman Catholic convent of the Sacred Heart at 2222 Broadway. And she's Jewish. And she went to an all-Catholic, strict, arrogant, military, structured indoctrination center known as the Society of the Sacred Heart. I know a lot about it. One of my relatives was the principal of that military institution, which, by the way, is 4 blocks from the Army Presidio. In other words, when the Convent of the Sacred Heart Order was created in San Francisco, it was actually created during the French Revolution north of Paris, about 100 kilometers north of Paris, was the Society of the Sacred Heart Order as a paramilitary organization to counter those pesky peasants who were rising up over the banking system, you know, back in 1791, right? Officially, the Society of the Sacred Heart was created in 1800, you know, sort of when the French Revolution had come to an end and we had the beginning of the Napoleonic period. But I can assure you that that was architected and blueprinted long before 1800. Anyway, when it was installed in the city of San Francisco, the city by the bay, it has a beautiful view of the Golden Gate Bridge. It was established before the Golden Gate Bridge was built, okay? But it looks out at Belvedere and Tiburon and Alcatraz and Angel Island, and it's very spectacular up there. About 3 blocks from that location is where you had the infamous Paul Pelosi hammer attack that never happened. And the reason that we know that the Paul Pelosi hammer attack never happened was, number one, that isn't where Paul Pelosi actually lives. He lives on Pacific Avenue, 1 block up and 5 blocks to the east. But they're remodeling the house, so it's possible he might have been staying over at 2640 Broadway. But the point is, if you're an 82-year-old man and you just survived a near-fatal Porsche Carrera car wreck in Napa County, you know, a few months ago, and then a 42-year-old man conks you on the head with a hammer, you'll be dead. You're going to be dead or in a coma for the next 6 months. But he only spent 1 week at a hospital. The hospital that's the furthest away from where he was conked in the head. You do realize you can walk to Presbyterian Pacific Medical Center, which is approximately 5 blocks from 2640 Broadway, which is 3 blocks from where Dianne Feinstein a Jewish girl, went to a Roman Catholic parochial school, the Convent of the Sacred Heart, at 2222 Broadway. The reason I bring this up, people, is that in all these stories that I run into, there's this partnership between Jewish people and Roman Catholics, like Paul Pelosi and Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, who's Jewish, but went to a Catholic parochial school. And here we have Sam Bankman. Doesn't that sound like a CIA name, Bankman? And he's integrated right into the story at the Stanford University campus. Anyway, he was born and raised to an upper middle class Jewish family, allegedly, and he's the son of Barbara Fried and Joseph Bankman, who are both professors at the Stanford Law School. Well, there's not a lot of law that's practiced at the Stanford Law School or the Harvard Law School or the Hastings Law School where Camilla Harris went to, because our nation functions under maritime law, admiralty law. That means we're all on a ship and the captain is in charge. Just to dumb it down for you. You can read your books on the United States Constitution and read your Bill of Rights, but in the end, the captain is going to tell you, you're on my ship and I'm the master of my ship. And you follow my rules, and we follow orders or people die. We follow orders or people die. So there's really not a whole lot to teach at the Stanford Law School or at the Harvard Law School or the Hastings Law School because there's no law. Okay? It's everything is do what I say and be quiet. Sam's aunt is Linda P. Fried, who is the current dean of Columbia University Mailman School of Public Health. Oh, that's great. They're in the public health business. I suppose they wear face diapers because I do believe that Stanford University and Stanford Medical Center are a face-masking cult ritual institution. And I'm pretty sure that's how Columbia University would roll too. And Sam's aunt works, not only does she work there, she's in charge. She's the fake dean. She's the fake leader. All right. You should also know that Sam attended the Canada, United States of America math camp. Ooh, he's a wizard in math, which is a summer program for the mathematically talented high school students. He also attended high school at the Crystal Springs Upland School in Hillsborough, California. That's where Patricia Hearst went to school. Patricia Hearst also went to the Santa Catalina Academy in Spooksville, Monterey. All right, so I'm telling you, this Crystal Springs Upland School, that's a CI spook school for children of bankers and espionage agents and lawyers who are infiltrated into all industries in the world economy. And they send their children to the Dominican School or the Sacred Heart Academy in San Francisco, or they send them to the Crystal Springs Upland School, or they send them to the to Ojai, to two different schools in Ojai. One for Jewish kids, which I think is called the Highland School, and then one for the non-Jewish children, which is called the Thatcher Institute, the Thatcher School. And then from there, you can go to Harvard, Yale, Stanford University for your undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. Anyway, after Sam went to the Crystal Springs School, which, as you know, that's where Paul Pelosi, was involved with crashing his sports car and killing his older brother David, was in close proximity to the Crystal Springs Upland School in Hillsborough. That's where Paul Pelosi, at age 16 in 1953, I think, he killed his older brother on Skyline Boulevard near the Crystal Springs Reservoir. Do you see how neat and tidy this zip code is? Anyway, then Sam Bankman went off to Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and there he lived in a coeducational group housing called Epsilon Theta. Okay, well, that's a cult ritual fraternity-based society. And in 2014, he graduated with a degree in physics and a minor in mathematics. Anyway, I could read on to about his career. He then went to the Jane Street Capital, a proprietary trading company in New York City, in Manhattan. He wasn't there very long, just enough to get his toes wet to dip into the pool, the cesspool known as banking Wall Street. Then in September 2017, Sam Bankman-Fried left Jane Street and moved to Berkeley. You know, that's CIA Spooksville, USA, Berkeley across the bay from San Francisco, which is also a CIA city. And he worked at the Center for Effective Altruism as director of development. Now, that's code for collecting money, people. When they say development, when you work for an art museum, or you work for the symphony, or you work for the opera, or some tax-deductible nonprofit organization, and you're the director of development, that means you collect money from people who make a lot of money or work in the clandestine services world, and you also collect money directly from the intelligence community, who also has hundreds and thousands of endowment funds. You know, like Harvard University has more endowment fund bank savings accounts than it has undergraduate students. So you know something's up with your university when you have more financial banking accounts than you have students attending classes on your campus, which means that you're a bank, you're a hedge fund, you're a shadow bank. You don't follow any bank rules, but you basically function by a bank in that you bestow money through grant funding or loans, credit, to targeted activities that you want to pursue. That's called money laundering. That's called the concealment of sources and uses of money. You do that through being a director of development. So here's young Sam, who would have been only, 24, 25 years old, and he's being introduced to the world of money laundering by being a director of development for the Center of Effective Altruism. That sounds a lot like the Gotham bookstore that they integrated, Abigail Folger into in Manhattan, which then was celebrated in a Hollywood film called 3 Days of the Condor, where they renamed the Gotham bookstore, which was founded by Columbia University, where Sam's aunt is a director, and or a dean. She's a dean. They renamed the Gotham bookstore for the film starring John Houseman, who is what is John Houseman? He's a Ukrainian Jewish fellow, and Robert Redford and Cliff Robertson were in that film, and they renamed the Gotham bookstore the Historic Literary Society, which was a CIA spook operation for decoding and encoding messages using novels. It's not too different than Sam Bankman, really. Anyway, so he's a director of development there, and then he founded the Alameda Research, which is a quantitative trading firm, along with Tara McNulty from the Center of Effective Altruism. That's probably his control agent or someone who is a CIA operative, because I can assure you that the Center for Effective Altruism is not about altruism. It's about money laundering. And in 2021, Sam owned approximately 90% of Alameda Research, blah, blah, blah. I don't care how much money you think he's worth. I don't care what percentages he has. It's all monopoly money. It's meaningless. And unless we can actually do an audit, which we'll never be allowed to do, it doesn't mean anything. It's like saying that Bill Gates is rich, or that Jeffrey Bezos is a billionaire, or that Larry Ellison is a billionaire, or Steve Ballmer is a billionaire. No, they're not. They have Japanese gardeners. They have a chauffeur. They have access to private jets. But they can only live in one home at a time. They can only sleep in one bed at a time. They can only drive one sports car at a time. So they're really only worth $50 to $100 million, really. I mean, if you have a Japanese gardener and a butler and a 40-foot hedgerow and multiple residences for you to be able to sleep overnight at, then, you're doing pretty good. That's about as good as anyone can do in our world. I've personally asked a scion who probably has over $1 trillion, what he was worth, and he said, I have absolutely no idea. But you see, why would you need to know? I mean, first you'd have to do an inventory of everything that you think you own or that you do own, and then you'd have to take the market value of it, I guess, on that day. But that's going to fluctuate day to day, right? Real estate, silver coins, stocks and companies, treasury bonds, notes, debentures. What does it all mean? It's all subjective, right? And you'd end up coming up with a number that's a preposterously high number if you were a scion. The number would be in the hundreds of billions of dollars if you were a scion. And you would be a beneficiary of a land trust, which technically you don't own the trust, right? But would you care if you were the owner of 1,000,000 acres of prime real estate that you could collect rent on? Would you care if you collected the rent and you didn't know anything about the cattle ranching and you didn't know anything about the tenants and you never visited the property, but you got a check every month for $100 million for rent? Would you really care what your property is worth? Would you? And the answer is no, you don't care what your property is worth. So scions don't care what their property is worth because guess what? They get monthly checks credited to their bank accounts that they could never spend in their entire lives. So who cares about money? The only people that talk about money and care about money are poor people or middle class people who had a taste of it. They got a little taste of it. And that's where they come up with Agenda 21, where in the future we'll go to a social participation obedience score and you will own nothing but be happy, because 99% of the planet Earth doesn't own any real estate and they don't own any stocks and bonds. So they don't know what you're talking about being worth $100 billion. They know nothing about it. They don't own anything now, and they may be happy, and some of them are happy. The ones that never had a taste of having a fancy car or a really expensive meal in an expensive restaurant, perhaps they, if you don't know what you're missing, you're not unhappy. Anyway, so I want to continue on here to tell you a little bit about the fact that that Sam Bankman-Fried, he's total CIA, completely. So the story is a CIA story. And, you know, how many times do we have to tell you, if you've been watching my channel, we had let me just get back on screen here so I can see what I'm doing. So we had this thing called Pearl Harbor. This is before I was born. Remembering Pearl Harbor. It's kind of like remembering the Maine, the USS Maine, that was sunk in the harbor of Havana, Cuba, the town where Jose Menendez was born, the home where Jose, gosh, I forgot his name already. The guy who murdered John Lennon at the Dakota, he was born in Havana, Cuba also, and worked for the police in the city of Havana. And he went on to work with Frank Sturgis, who was working with Fidel Castro, and Jose Menendez's family was friendly with the Batista regime, and the murderer of John Lennon was friendly with the Batista regime, and yet became partners with Frank Sturgis, who's supposedly working on the enemy side, right? But I'm here to tell you that there is no enemy. It's spy versus spy. One person is wearing a white coat and one's wearing a black coat, but they work for the same clandestine services. So Fidel Castro and General Batista, they're on the same team. It's just one's considered a communist and the other one's considered a fascist capitalist, if there is such a thing. Anyway, it's all a deception. And Pearl Harbor was a deception, because you can't have the Japanese, who have 8 aircraft carriers, and they send 6 of them to the Hawaiian Islands, whilst the United States Navy is imposing an oil embargo blockade, but they allow the 6 aircraft carriers to get through the blockade, so there's no Navy intelligence. If you believe the Pearl Harbor surprise sneak attack, you have to believe that the CIA, Army, OSS, Navy intelligence were asleep at the wheel to allow the nation of Japan, which had the second most aircraft carriers in the world. The United States had the most aircraft carriers. I think we had 12. And the Japanese had 8. And the Russians, those evil Russians, they had 0. And the Nazis, they had 0 aircraft carriers. But the Japanese had 8. And they sent 6 of the 8 to Pearl Harbor. And the United States Navy had 8 aircraft carriers in the general area of the Pacific Fleet. And 4 of them were stationed at Pearl Harbor, and 2 of them were docked at Pearl Harbor just 72 hours before Pearl Harbor happened, the surprise sneak attack. and they pulled the Enterprise and the Lexington out of Pearl Harbor just before the attack. The Enterprise left, I think, on Wednesday, and the Lexington left on Saturday, the day before the attack. So there was intelligence. The OSS, Navy intelligence, knew there was going to be an attack on Pearl Harbor. They had the aircraft carriers there, as incentive to come get us, right? They pulled them out at the last minute. Then we had the surprise sneak attack by the Japanese, who decided not to torpedo or drop bombs on the grid of the electrical system. The power grid in Honolulu, Hawaii was untouched. And they only sunk World War I, circa World War I battleships, which have no strategic value in the War of the Pacific. So, in other words, we sustained no casualties other than the 2,000 men that were killed in their bunks. That's it. So, that's the PSYOPS. That's a psychological, to fake you out that Pearl Harbor was a surprise sneak attack. It was a surprise attack for the people who died. It was not a surprise attack for the people who run the banks. They're well aware of it. And they authorized and they funded it. Because if you're in an oil embargo situation, how are you going to get fuel to drive your aircraft carriers and all your supply ships? And the answer is a bank's going to extend you some money to get that. Then we had the Francis Gary Powers Operation Overflight, Lockheed Martin. Back then it was just Lockheed. Written by Kurt Gentry. Kurt Gentry is a CIA book author, and this is a fake CIA book about how the evil Russians, using a rocket missile, shot Francis Gary Powers out of the sky at 65,000 feet, 80,000 feet, 100,000 feet. Don't know, can't get a straight answer on that. Turns out it never happened. The Russians did not shoot him out of the sky, nor would they ever want to. This plane has a camera. The camera has film. You'd want to get the camera and the film. Now, the plane that Gary Powers was flying, the camera had been removed and replaced by an old camera, and I don't even know if there was any film in it, okay? And he landed the plane safely in a farm field where he was captured, along with a dozen pieces of personal identification, which verifies who he was as a person, who his wife is, his California driver's license, where he lives in Lancaster, Edwards Air Force Base, Palmdale area, near China Lake. And then he's a colonel in the Air Force, and he's working for Lockheed Martin with security clearance, flying a Lockheed Martin CIA airplane. So that's deliberate on purpose, because I can tell you from personal experience that spy pilots do not carry any personal identification with them on their missions. So if you find identification under the seat cushion, it was planted there deliberately on purpose and not by the pilot. Anyway, the reason I bring up this Kurt Gentry person is he went on to write the story on the USS Pueblo in 1968, which is a Navy intelligence spy ship. Okay, the USS Pueblo. The book that Kurt Gentry wrote is entitled Second in Command. Second in Command because the Koreans attacked the ship and conked the commander of the USS Pueblo on the head, and he was knocked unconscious. So the second in command had to take over. The next CIA book that Kurt Gentry wrote was after the Charlie Manson murder trial, where he was convicted of 7 murders of Sharon Tate, and Abigail Folger, and Lena LaBianca, etc., which is a mendacity unto itself. But that book was called Helter Skelter, and everybody is under the impression that Vincent Bugliosi wrote that book because he was an assistant in the trial. He was the 5th banana on the murder trial, but everybody thinks he was the lead prosecutor. No, he wasn't. He went and got donuts. That's what his job was. Get the coffee, get the donuts, you knucklehead. And Kurt Gentry wrote that book. So Kurt Gentry is CIA. Kurt Gentry lived in San Francisco. San Francisco is CIA. Kurt Gentry is CIA. His books are CIA. Okay? That's where he made his career. CIA books. So the whole story of the Charlie Manson is a CIA story. It's a CIA constructed story. Do you believe stories from the CIA? That's what Overflight was. Operation Overflight is a CIA plan of reconnaissance and taking photographs over other countries without their permission from a high altitude. And then when a plane goes down, they want to blame the boogeyman for it. That plane landing was deliberate on purpose to create a national incident, which torpedoed the Dwight Eisenhower's Crusade for Peace, which was scheduled for May 1960. And what day did Gary Francis Powers land his plane near Moscow in the center of Russia? On May 1st, 1960. 2 weeks. 2 weeks before the Crusade for Peace in Paris, France, where they were to sign peace agreements for anti-proliferation of nuclear weapons. And that didn't happen. I mean, they still had the conference, but it was an unsuccessful event due to the embarrassing staged Francis Gary Powers fake shoot down. Then, of course, we had the PSYOPS of John F. Kennedy, right? And that was validated by the Warren Commission that Lee Harvey Oswald, a 5-year employee of CIA, did it all by himself, acting alone. And he's a 5-year employee of the CIA. But he did it all by himself, alone. Poppycock. Then, I mean, I'm skipping around here, but then we have House of Cards, right? This is a story about financial hedge funds, private equity on Wall Street that are crazy successful and then implode overnight. This is a story of companies where everybody thought, that they were the cat's meow and people wanted to get in. They wanted to get in. It's a Ponzi scheme. And it's constructed by the clandestine services, which is a form of financial terrorism. And they get a lot of innocent people who are greedy to jump onto it, and then they tank it, and it destroys confidence. And it's a psychological form of terrorism for people who happen to have money. Then we have this fake book called Tom O'Neill's Chaos. The only thing real about this book is the title, Chaos. Charlie Manson, whose name is really Scott, so he got that wrong. It should be Charles Scott, so he's got that wrong. This is the name of a CBS porn company called Manson International. Charles Manson's real name is Scott, because Charles' biological father's name is Colonel Walker Scott. So Charles is Scott. So that's wrong. Then you got the CIA. Okay, well that's right, because CIA and chaos do go together. And the secret history of the 60s. Okay, well that's correct. And that's the most correct thing. Everything else in this book is a diversion and a distraction, because if you picked up this book wanting to learn who murdered Abigail Folger and Sharon Tate and Lena LaBianca that nobody cares about, you will not get that question answered in this book. So again, another diversion. Because I personally want to know about the M7 bayonet, because this is what killed everybody right here. And the reason that they want you to focus on words like chaos and words like confusion and words like cult and crazy Manson family is so that you don't discuss military, My Lai massacre, M16 rifles attached to the M7 bayonet in a controlled area known as Benedict Canyon, which only has 107 homes, and the vast majority of those homes are consigned to Hollywood insiders or actors, producers, directors, actors who were given provisional housing in that area, in the same exact way that Laurel Canyon is provisional housing for music artists, television stars, film stars like Steve McQueen, fake governor candidates like Jerry Brown, who's living with Linda Ronstadt on Lookout Mountain Road, or fake musicians like Frank Zappa, who was a musician. I'm not saying he's not, but he's a fake rock star because he didn't sell any albums. So he's a real musician who wasn't used in the way like the Beatles were, or like the Mamas and the Papas were, or like Jimi Hendrix was. He wasn't that type of a social engineer. They had a different plan for Frank Zappa than they did for Neil Young, for example. All right. So, but they're in the same industry, and they live in Laurel Canyon. So they're on the same program. It's just they have different responsibilities. Anyway, the CIA does not want you to discuss or own an M7 bayonet. That's why you don't hear anything about it. And then we have another PSYOPS, which is the secret history of the CIA, right? Well, they're not going to tell you the truth about the CIA, which is that it's part of the bank. It's part of a bank. Why don't you do the secret history of banking, right? Anyway, that circles us right back to the Sam Bankman-Fried story, because that's what he is. He's the PSYOPS of all the new young people who think that they can escape the prison camp known as our civilization and get cryptocurrency, which is going to be run over a military-industrial internet system, and that they can transact business without having to have a bank account at, any one of the big names: Citibank, Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, blah, 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 fake banks. And what I wanted to emphasize very clearly to everyone listening to this video is the biggest PSYOPS of all is our banking system. It's complete black magic, Wizard of Oz. They told you, go back and watch The Mighty Wizard of Oz, released in August 1939, starring Judy Garland as the little girl with the dog Toto, who revealed who the Wizard of Oz really was, who was played by Frank Morgan. Frank Morgan played the Mighty Wizard of Oz. I believe he also played a school teacher in that film. Anyway, he's a little old man on a stepladder pulling some levers. That's our banking system. It's based on your belief of following the yellow brick road and not going into the weeds where the flying monkeys and the Sacred Heart convent nun in the habit by the name of Evelyn from the East, for you folks in the New York, New Jersey area, your witch is the Wicked Witch of the East. Her name is Evelyn. And then where I am, where Stanford University is, in Sequoia Capital, partner in FTX, and KKR, home to Erin Valente's last meeting before she ended up dead in the back of her rent-a-car 5 days after her meeting at Sand Hill Road, right next to Stanford University, where Sam Bankman was born. Right there. Okay? That witch is called Evil. And she dresses in a Sacred Heart convent habit, except she's got the pointy hat. That's the only difference. She has flying monkeys and the pointing hat. Otherwise, she literally is the epitome of 2222 Broadway, where Dianne Feinstein attended parochial Catholic school. The nuns at that school are dressed identically to the Wicked Witch of the West and the Wicked Witch of the East that the house fell on. And the ruby slippers, remember them? That I think used to be silver slippers in the book, but got changed to ruby slippers for the epic film, The Wizard of Oz. That film told you everything that you need to know. If you believe in our banking system, it works. And in the words of an executive vice president of one of the world's largest banks told me once over cocktails, when I pointed out that his system of fractional banking and fake audits was flawed and based on lies, deception, and mendacity, he turned to me and in a sobering way, despite that he was on his second martini, told me, hey, it works until it doesn't work anymore. And so, look, I thought the system that we currently have and currently is structured with branch banking and debit cards, I thought this system was going to implode back when Ronald Reagan was president, when we quadrupled the national deficit and lost any sovereignty over the United States. I thought that the party was over then. And, I was wrong. That was 37 years that I've been wrong. I've been consistently wrong for 37 years. But I think the point is, at some point in time, a cuckoo clock may be incorrect, but it does get the time correct twice a day. Even though it's wrong 99% of the time, the cuckoo clock is right twice a day. And that's what I am. I'm a cuckoo clock. I'm cuckoo for Cocoa Pops. That's what I am. And I'm here to tell you that at some point, this current system as designed will be replaced. But I don't think it's going to be replaced by cryptocurrency. I think it's going to be replaced by a central bank, digital currency, social participation, obedience surveillance score. And you will own nothing, and some of you will be happy and many of you will be unhappy. All right, that's all I'm going to talk about today. We're going to drill more into the Sam Bankman-Fried in the weeks to come. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.